It's the end of season 1 of the podcast.
So welcome to a news update?
We're going to end season 1 with a news update, and there are some timely and very important things happening to wrap up season 1 and 2024.
Part of this is very time specific, and that is in regards to this season, winter, ice, fishing opener.
Yeah.
Let us have it, Joe Fredericks.
Well, later we're going to get to something that is a huge deal for photographers, people who shoot video in public land across North America, including Superior National Forest and the Boundary Waters. We're going to get to the Explore Act later in the episode.
Which I'm looking forward to, so can we talk the fishing part quick?
Here's the deal. I've heard from a few people now around Grand Marais and over in Ely too in December about, hey, you getting ready for the trout opener? I heard from somebody, we're recording this on the 27th, and they were saying, you getting ready for the fishing opener tomorrow, lake trout in the Boundary Waters?
Wrong.
Yes, exactly. These are people who go every year.
Yep.
That go ice fishing on this preseason for lakes entirely within the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness only. And then 2 weeks later, it opens up on the other lakes like Seagull, Sag, those types of lakes over there. So the Minnesota legislature this year changed the rule from the law that says it starts January 1 or the Saturday closest to January 1. Like, that's how it used to be. So with the way it used to be, it would have opened Saturday, December 28th.
Yes, that would be in line with the past. But the past is no longer in alignment with the future.
Now it's January 1. That's how the Boundary Waters trout fishing season is going to be henceforth. It will always be January 1. Doesn't matter if it's on a Sunday, a Wednesday, or a Friday or Saturday. It's always going to start January 1, regardless of what day of the week that is. And that was new. I mean, we reported on that first back in like April, May timeframe, right after that law changed. It says now it's January 1. I spoke with somebody named Shannon Fisher from the DNR about that. We posted that. Didn't get a lot of attention on the site. I mean, some people clicked on it, and sort of the regular angler crowd who follows paddle and portage, paid some attention to it. But then I heard from the local conservation officer here in Cook County, Hudson Ledeen, this fall, and he was like, hey, just so you know, it's what the book says. And they actually updated the regulations for the DNR, and now it says January 1 in there. And we're going to be hearing from Hudson in just a moment about the fact that this year the opener's on a weekday and that it's January 1, what the enforcement part of it's going to be, even what it's going to be like this weekend. Like, are people going out? Because it's possible people just assume the opener is the 28th, and that is incorrect. So if you're hearing this and you're driving up to go lake trout or brook trout fishing in the Boundary Waters thinking it's the opener, you can go for some walleye outside the wilderness or in, but just don't target trout. That's the main thing. So let's turn it over to Hudson, hear what he has to say about this. You're in full uniform today on the 28th. If you went out there and you found somebody fishing on Duncan Lake or wherever in the Boundary Waters, what happens?
Well, we'd have to have a conversation, see what's going on. I feel like every time I do these interviews, we talk about we're just people, right? And people make mistakes. It's kind of hard to come up with a valid excuse on why you'd be making this mistake in this situation. Reason being is that you have all the information available, right? We print out our regulations books. We have them available online. They come in 5 different languages. If you need someone to interpret them to you, we're more than able of accomplishing that as well. So it just doesn't add up. Everyone knows that when you buy your fishing license, you're agreeing to participate in a regulated activity, and it is your responsibility as the angler to know what those regulations are for where you're fishing, when you're fishing, how you're fishing, and so forth. So the idea of, say, coming up from a different part of the state to come trout fishing up here and, the Arrowhead region, specifically in the Boundary Waters, and the amount of time, scheduling, gas isn't necessarily cheap. People put a lot of effort into it.
Mm-hmm.
And to simply not read the regulations book and know what you can and cannot be doing at certain times is just inexcusable. Now, I get it. There's situations that can occur where people, like I said, make a mistake, but it's really hard to argue with that one.
That's just a clip of my conversation with Hudson Ledeen, local conservation officer who covers the Boundary Waters region here in Cook County. And if you know me or listen to the podcast or follow Paddle and Portage, you know that I like to go fishing and talk about fishing. So when I have an opportunity to discuss things with somebody like Hudson, tend to have a lot to say. And indeed we did on this conversation on the 28th. If you want to hear that full conversation, there's a whole other episode, like a bonus track, essentially, that we're releasing, mostly because there's a lot of news happening here at the end of the year, and we didn't want to make this episode too long. So that's the trout news opener, fishing regulations update on the podcast.
Super helpful, super timely. Also helpful to our work and to the work that many people do as storytellers. Well, and quite much more significant and broadly is the Explore Act. And that just was passed by Congress. We'll get into more of the specific implications of, some of the work that we're going to talk about, but give us the general overview, if you could, Joe.
I will, and I will also direct you to paddleandportage.com, where we have an article posted about this with links to the law that we're talking about when we say the Explore Act. We've got some feedback and response from officials on Superior National Forest about what it means for the Boundary Waters and people who go and take a video or photograph and put it on a website or social media or YouTube or something. They are delegating that largely to the Washington, D.C. office and or waiting until January before they give us an official comment on that. So if you want to know all the specifics and read it for yourself and see the bill and this Explore Act that we're talking about, go to paddleandportage.com, because talking about legislation sometimes is a bit clunky on a podcast. We're going to talk about it through story and what it means for us. And in just a moment, we're going to sit down with Bryan, Hansel, local photographer, and hear some of his experiences having the commercial film photography language sort of tossed at Bryan, and our own experiences in that as well. In summary, though, what it means is this is encouraging people to get out on public land and not to be afraid of taking a picture and where you share that and what repercussions there could be.
Essentially, the momentum of it is to create more liberty, freedom, and autonomy on public lands.
Exactly.
Which is a wonderful thing when done responsibly, which is always the sort of assumption going on behind all of these regulations. Is that if you're acting in a responsible manner, you shouldn't have problems. I want to back up a little bit. And I think this will help sort of set up some of the significance of this shift that could occur. So you may have known, hearing some of our stories about the Boundary Waters, that a couple of years back I released a short documentary film called Rainbows in the Wilderness. Premiered at the Ely Film Festival, a few other places. Super simple film that accompanied a trip into the Boundary Waters, telling the story of that trip. After it released at the Ely Film Fest, I was contacted by the United States Forest Service, who was brought to their attention that there was potentially some violations of regulations that in making that film, specifically that the film was shot in the Boundary Waters without a commercial filming permit. And I had to go through several conversations with the Forest Service around this issue. And basically, according to the regulations at that time, even though there was some gray area in my perspective, according to the Forest Service, that was a violation. If this Explore Act is passed...
Oh, it's passed.
Well...
Signed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
If it's signed, what I did is not a gray area at all. In fact, it is very much allowed.
Absolutely. And in talking, as we set up Paddle and Portage and talking with photographers from Cook County, Duluth, other places in Minnesota where some photographers at the Blueberry Festival in Ely actually said, you can't share these photographs. You got to take it down. All that concern, and it goes away with the Explore Act. And the biggest area, the thing that was most troubling for the photographers I spoke with last January 24 setting up Paddle Portage was, it's this gray area. We just don't really know commercial, what constitutes. Does it mean I don't have a set? I'm not going out. I just happen to be out there and I took this picture. Now they're saying it's commercial, or maybe they aren't. I don't know. The gray area. Gray area is no way to exist for government or the citizens most specifically.
Exactly. I think it actually ends up leading to lots of fear and uncertainty. And that's what makes this so positive. Is I just love that you said that. It eliminates that gray area. It provides certainty and clarity. I felt really bad for the Forest Service because as I was talking with this fantastic employee about this issue of commercial filming, she was just trying to do her job to enforce regulations and protect the wilderness. And I was just trying to do my job and point out the things that didn't make sense. And unfortunately, two well-meaning people could not see eye to eye. And now we can.
So let's bring in a well-known photographer, Bryan Hansel, who's had experiences similar to yours and what we're discussing here with the Explore Act. Hear what Bryan has to say about this. All right, now we're talking with Cook County-based photographer Bryan Hansel. Bryan, thanks for being down here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For sure. So let's talk about the Explore Act and what it means for you as somebody who has photography workshops on national forest land across North America and who frequently visits the Boundary Waters and takes photographs and so forth. Like, what does this law, this bill, mean to you as a professional and individual?
Yeah, well, first, just as a kind of a basic, recreational user on our public lands, is I'm really excited about this because there's a lot of goodness in this that makes it better for all recreational users. But for specific, like from a professional perspective, there's a couple different things in this bill that I really like, and it's going to make it easier on the permitting side potentially for me, maybe not, but definitely when running a workshop. And like one of the things that's in there that I think is kind of interesting is this picnic area usage. Like if you, in the past, what would happen if I was running a photo workshop somewhere and I wanted to use a picnic area, I would have to get a special use permit from the Forest Service, or I would have to get a commercial use authorization from the National Park System just to pull in and take a picnic for lunch with my people. So you'd have to go through all that permitting. Now, even if I don't have one of those permits, I can pull into a picnic area and just have a picnic, like a normal person can.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Like this, it just seems like it should have always been this way, but because the laws just weren't written this way, they had to follow the law. So there was no way that they could do something that seems just like common sense. One of the other things that might be pretty helpful from a professional's perspective is some of my workshops take place on multiple different federal lands that are controlled by different agencies. Now, with the permitting reform, potentially I would only need to get one permit instead of the multiple different permits that I would need. Like, for example, I just did one in Blue Ridge Parkway last year, and I needed permits from Pisgah National Forest and the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is National Park Service.
Where's that at? Where's that located?
So that's in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that would be near Asheville kind of area, Brevard, Asheville.
And that was cumbersome and duplicative and so forth.
Yep. Yeah. And for myself personally, I don't necessarily run on multiple lands all the time, but sometimes I do. But someone that would be, where this is really going to be helpful is for like outfitters that have like a backpacking trip that's going to cross like 3 different land management agency locations. They only have to worry about that one permit now, which will be just fantastic for them. But we'll see how it rolls out, because potentially I run workshops. I run a workshop out in the Black Hills, which is South Dakota, and out there I'm using Badlands, which is one national park. I'm using Wind Cave, which is another national park, and then in the past I've also looked into using the Forest Service and a couple locations of Forest Service, which is actually just 2 locations I wanted on Forest Service land, which would have been a total of 2 hours. And I had to go through more permitting paperwork to get than I would actually be on the public land. So like if this rolls out so it's helpful for that kind of trip, then it really minimizes the amount of paperwork that I have to do, which would be huge.
What about just like the average person that comes up and does a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters, films it for their friends and family largely? So we're not talking about like a Shug or somebody that's like a pretty established YouTuber, but just somebody that takes a video of their canoe trip, puts it on YouTube. That was always a sort of a gray area, it seemed like, in terms of, is that legit to do? And now that seems like it's gone away.
Yeah, it was always kind of this weird gray area because on YouTube or any other social media, the social media company is making money by running advertisements. So technically that would have been commercial usage. So we ran into this like really weird gray area where somebody that could go out with their cell phone that was just on vacation and they throw it on YouTube and YouTube runs an ad on it. Well, it's potentially commercial. That's gone now. So the way that it works now is instead of determining whether or not it's a commercial usage or a non-commercial usage, it's just determined on how many people are going to be involved with the event, which is more of an impact on the land type of usage, which I think makes a lot more sense.
And it's 6 or fewer now.
Yeah, it's fewer than 6 is what it's written in the law. So
fewer than 6.
I would assume that's 5.
I got it.
5.
Yeah. We'll see if it's 6 or fewer. We've got all these links in the article that I'm on paddleandporch.com that we'll share that specifically, but let's just say 6 or fewer or whatever.
Yeah, it's 6 is what the law says is 6. The actual, you got the verbiage right in the law. It's 6 or fewer users. So how they interpret that is up to them.
Right. And they also don't want things that would impact or violate the Wilderness Act. So you can't be like cutting down a tree because you want to get a better shot or something like that. You can't impact the land. And that's where I think a lot of this discrepancy started from commercial when the law was written, the idea that there's a film crew that's going out there with equipment and they're trying to get shots and stuff. And the YouTube sort of phenomenon that unfolded well after that law was written, it's not what is happening now. People are just sort of seeing, you're almost just seeing it through someone's eyes. Yeah,
exactly. And, I don't think back when they wrote the original permitting laws that they had any idea that, an individual YouTuber or creator could go out and make a living from filming themselves with a GoPro. And like that's like totally legit now. And that has zero impact on the land. If they're going to go on a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters anyways, and they just wanted to film it and they just happen to make, a few bucks off of YouTube from it. Now they can do it.
Right.
Honestly, from my perspective, a couple of years ago, I did this trip that I recreated a canoe route from 1879 from Newton Horace Winchell, who was the state geologist at the time. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to film it. So I was trying to work with the Forest Service to figure out how I could film this legally and potentially make it into a documentary. And I didn't know that I would sell it or make any money. And I just wanted to show it at Canoecopia. It was my basic thing. But if I would have made any money off of it, then it became a commercial usage at that point. Who knows? Like, I'm not a great documentary filmmaker by anything. I do YouTube every now and then. But you never know if things are going to take off. And if it took off and I got paid $10, all of a sudden it's $10 of advertisement on YouTube. All of a sudden it's a commercial usage. And they wanted to charge me something like $250 a day to film. And I was planning 10 days on the trip. So to film this would have been $2,500. And I just, under the old law, like I felt absolutely silenced. Like I couldn't practice my First Amendment rights. Like it was actually felt a little terrifying. Mm-hmm. Because they could get you anywhere. Like and the thing is, like in the past, the way that you could do things, if I set up my tripod, put my camera on top, and take a photo, it was completely legal. And that photo I could go and sell as a print. I could sell it to a magazine. I could project it on the screen. I could sync it to music and put it on YouTube and make money from it. And that was totally, completely 100% legal. And then there was just a switch on my camera that if I switched and I pushed a button, then it was 100% illegal because it would have been a video. So just the old law just made absolutely new sense. And now as long as you have that 6 or under or whatever it's going to be, you don't have to worry about it. You can just flip that switch on your camera and make money from it, which just makes sense to me.
Right. Yeah, and there are other people who have experienced things similar to yours, where either the fees involved, the daily fee, the fact they had to have a $1 million insurance liability policy in order to even apply for it. You don't know the timeline of when you're going to hear back, if you're going to get that permit in time for your trip. It's just nice to relax a little bit about public land and kind of be like, we're not making a high budget movie out here. And if we are, we still need to apply for permits, and that may or may not happen. But for people like us, we can just go out there and take it easy a little bit. I think that this is a nice way for the Forest Service to sort of relax and focus on other things too, not specific to commercial filming in the way that maybe they have been. And I will say in their defense that they were sort of hamstrung by this because the law was written before YouTube came out, but they still need to enforce the laws that are on the books. Like, they were in a pretty tough spot too. So I will acknowledge that it wasn't like the Forest Service were being bullies all the time. I mean, they were just doing what the books told them to do.
Yeah, and I think if you would have asked a few of them, which I did, I'm not going to say who, but I did ask somebody about it, and then they said they thought the laws were kind of outdated, but there's nothing that they could do about it. So it just made a common sense to kind of reform it to the technology that's available now for everybody.
I don't want to get into the politics of this, Bryan, but I think I can say accurately that you're not, some sort of anti-government type of individual. But when it came to the permitting process that you were describing, like, that's the stuff that drives people crazy about government. It's just unnecessary hurdles that people have to go through to do basic things like take a picture or a video, and to reduce that is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I think so. Kind of on a tangent of that, if we're going to go into the government permitting thing, is one of the reforms that we've seen under Biden is a simplification of permitting for commercial youth authorizations in national parks. So in the past, I'd have to email or snail mail in some cases these permits, and they took a lot of time. And now that is all actually kind of standardized into one online system that makes it super easy to apply for permitting. It just makes everything a lot faster for myself personally, who has multiple commercial use authorizations on multiple parks in this system. And now this, on top of it, it just feels like it's a real big win for people that want to tell their stories and bring people to national parks and forests, and just try to get people enthused about protecting these areas, because now we can share the stories, we can share our adventures without having to worry about getting a big fine afterwards.
Right. Do you think that there is another side of that scenario where people could view it as more exploitation, or it's promoting places like the Boundary Waters, and as these videos are just going all over YouTube, that I want to get on that, as part of the overcrowding, sort of reckless usage of the wilderness that we hear about occasionally too, that there could be a negative side of this in some regard?
Potentially. We have like a historical thing that we can look at. A few years ago, there was a lawsuit. So National Park Service, somebody went out and filmed like a movie, like a documentary in the National Park Service land, and they had like a very small crew. It was just under five or fewer people. And then the National Park Service was going to fine them. And then he took the National Park Service to court, and he won that court case. And there was a period of time, I think maybe 2 years, where we could actually film in national parks without worry. Like, they redid all the rules to basically reflect exactly what this law says. And there just weren't any issues. Like, it wasn't a deal. So I think if we base it on what happened in the past, I don't think that we're going to see that much problems. But if there are, Congress could certainly relook at this law in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we've already been seeing it in the sense that YouTubers, people making these family videos, or even people like Shug, whatever, they're just not thinking about the permit, that they even needed one, basically, in most instances, because why couldn't I take a video of my canoe trip into the woods? So I think we aren't going to see some massive surge of people out there filming now because of the Explore Act.
Yeah, and if we do, the the permanently or the level that doesn't require a permit is so small that you're probably not going to see a significant amount of impact. The one thing that I do have a little bit of concern with over this law is some of the language in there says that you won't be able to do it at, I forget the exact language, but at extremely busy areas. They can restrict that use and require permits. And I don't think like the boundary waters can be considered extremely busy even in a weekend that has all of the quota permits are gone.
Or like the stairway portage or something.
Or like the stairway portage. But where I can see that potentially being enforced is like on national park land. And you're going to have to forgive me because they just renamed this. In the past, it was called Klingman's Dome in the Smoky Mountains. Smoky Mountains is our most visited national park, and Klingman's Dome is definitely one of the more popular areas, if not the most popular area for sunsets. And under the old law, they couldn't stop you from taking a picture there. Under the new law, there could be a little wiggle room that they could restrict photos and videos in some of the areas that were allowed in the past. So that's like my biggest concern about this law. But for like boundary waters, that isn't going to be applied.
Like the 40 people at the stairway portage on a busy day, is that, busy is a subjective term, and yeah, that's maybe a bit challenging. I guess we'll see. But we got some cool people working on Spear National Forest. Like, I don't think it's going to be a huge issue in that regard.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. And like the Smokies, like busy wise, is every parking spot I think there's probably 150 parking spots there. Every parking lot is taken and it's overflowing. And there's 40 to 50 photographers there with tripods taking pictures. That's pretty rare to run into those situations. And I just cite the Smokies because it's the most visited national park.
And Yellowstone with wolves and Lamar Valley and those types of things.
I've been in some locations where it's been kind of interesting to see the large number of people shooting sunrises or sunsets, because photography in national parks is very popular right now, and it's only gotten more popular. And probably since 2020, I think it's gotten significantly busier in the national park system than it was in like 2019 or 2018 for sure.
Well, how about just in conclusion, to see something like the Explore Act get passed through Congress unanimously through the Senate, and to see the government working for the people, doing something that makes sense for people who follow paddle and portage, who get out there like we do, like to see something that makes sense happen. That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I was really excited. It almost brought the proverbial tears to my eyes when it passed. And,
yes.
We don't get a lot of wins in outdoor recreation, so when we get a win that's this big, it's really exciting.
Bryan, Hansel, thanks for being here and sharing some of your perspective on this and some of your experiences with the sort of what had become a bit of an archaic law. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciated a conversation with Bryan Hansel, local photographer. And in addition, we've been really focused on the video and the photography part of the Explore Act, but it's much, much broader than that. And it also sort of reduces some of those barriers or obstacles when it comes to guiding permits and outfitting permits. So I've got questions in with the Forest Service specific to what that means for the boundary waters, the people who want to show people experiences in the wilderness. And we know that there's been moratoriums in place on Superior National Forest about permits going out to people who wanted to do any sort of guided commercial related activity. So there's a lot of other things in the Explore Act that aren't just about video and photography, media, that whole aspect of it.
And of course, selfishly, I'm quite excited about that, but I think there's so much room to be excited for just the way that this across the board is designed to increase access for all. And it's a step towards equitable access that overcomes even some of those historical barriers that we've seen for certain populations of people.
This is a very monumental law to people who engage with places like the boundary waters, the national parks, public land in the United States. This is a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying, Joe Fredericks, in addition to that, gratitude is that there were a lot of people across the country that helped make this happen. And so if just so happens that one of our listeners is in any way a part of that effort, large or small, we'd really love to hear from you and let us know what your part was.
And as we head out on the trout opener this year, as we heard from Hudson back at the beginning of the episode on January 1, we're going to be taking some pictures.
I may just film you swearing up a storm, trying to wrangle in a lake trout. Don't horse it! Hey, don't touch that line! Don't touch that line! You'll hear it for yourself.
You know what I was telling the K-Man the other day was how I just can't take it anymore with my bad line. Remember last year when we were missing fish and line was snapping? I was just like, I just can't do it anymore.
I believe you said that the year before that as well. I do recall.
I gotta go get some line. I'm out of here, LB. I'm going to get some freaking line.
Out of here.